folks, I'm going to get started. Thanks for joining us. Last session of the day. Woo-hoo-hoo. I'm really excited, and I want to talk about the economic impact study. But before I start through my slides, I want to tell you a little story. So most of you know, I came to the Horse Council in 2016. When I arrived, the Horse Council had not done an economic impact study since 2005. And the industry was just demanding we do a study, just could not wait till we had some data. So we launched and did an economic impact study in 2017. And because of that overwhelming cry to have current data, which we use and you guys use a lot, we committed that we wanted to do this study every 5 years. Well, that put us on target for doing one in 2022. So 2021 rolls around and we say, hey, we're going to do an economic impact study. And so let me just talk a little bit about this. So I want to tell you what a study is, because you won't believe how many questions we get about what the study is and what it isn't. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I want to talk about the process and the timeline and who all's involved and where we go from here. And then I just want to open the floor for conversation, because I will be honest and give you a precursor to say that right now, because of the pandemic, a lot of the groups that have traditionally supported an economic impact study are really hesitant. Okay, they're holding back. And I've actually had a conversation with a couple of people who say, I don't know that our industry has recovered enough that the data that we would get in a 2022 study would be what we would want. It may reflect a downturn that might be perceived as a little bit negative. So maybe we should hold off. So I don't know. We're going to talk some more about that. So here we go. Here's the traditional definition of an economic impact study. What it does is that it examines the effect of an event or an industry that it has on the economy, and it measures change in business revenue, profits, wages, and our jobs. Okay. We know economically diverse industry, the horse contributes significantly to the economy. So here are just a number of ways that we use the study, and I'm going to let Brian chime in a minute. But we go up on the Hill constantly with copies of the national study and the state studies to educate decision makers, lawmakers on the economic impact of the industry, either nationally or locally. And I'm going to pause there for a second and digress to say that our economic impact study is the most comprehensive study of the entire equine industry. A lot of people look at the data that comes from USDA, or it looks from data that comes from AVMA, and they do their own studies, but they have very specific definitions of what they include in their study. So their horse population, their economic impact numbers are never going to be as significant as ours. Ours is the only one that is so comprehensive. We definitely use the study to identify trends, look for ways we can forecast things, and try to figure out what actions need to be taken. We look for areas of growth in the industry, and we look for areas where we're declining. So if you were on the working horse panel discussion, you heard equine assisted services, yoo-hoo, Kathy, is one of our growingest sectors, but our mounted police officers and our carriage operators, also part of that sector, are one of those areas that needs attention. They are under scrutiny and having a difficult time. So we're trying to figure out ways to help them. We also use this to assess the demographics of the industry. What's the ages? What's the income levels? What are all those things? That tells us how we need to market, how we need to go after that target audience that we want to go after. We use it to inform decisions. Hang on, I got to move my toolbar because it's blocking my words here. There it goes. We use this to inform decisions about business development, such as construction or renovation of venues and trails and the viability of different events. Great example. We use this study in Florida, was talking about constructing an interstate from one side, east to west, across Florida. They called it the Sea to Sea connector, and it was going to come right through Ocala. And we used the data for Florida to be able to convince Florida legislatures not to build that because they were going to upset the entire ecosystem and the horse industry economic impact in that city and county. And we were very successful there. So it was great use of the data. We also use it to construct arguments and cases for legal defense, adverse legislation or regulation, a number of different ways that we can say, you don't want to do this because it is going to impact our industry in such a specific way. We also use it to help fight for green space and public lands. Now, if you heard Brian earlier this week, he's talking about the Great American Outdoors Act. He's talking about how we're using this data to help find ways to get deferred maintenance on trails and all those kinds of things. So Brian, feel free at this point, unmute and tell them what, from your perspective as our chief lobbyist, you use this study for.
Great, thank you, Julie. So I can't overstate the importance of this study and the number of times I've actually used it. It definitely goes both ways. I often get phone calls not only from coalition groups and allies, but directly from people from Capitol Hill who want details about the industry. For starters, if I haven't been into an office for a while, I give them the 2-pager on the summary, the fact that we are a $122 billion industry and employ directly nearly 1 million Americans gets everybody's attention. In the 2017 study, I believe we had about 14 breakout studies for specific states. Today, I'm actually pulling together some meetings for the Maryland delegation. So I've got a Maryland study that shows how many people in Maryland we employ, how many equines they have in the great Commonwealth of Maryland, and how much of an impact we have on their GDP. The fact that this was done in 2017 really doesn't diminish its value, at least from my perspective. I do give people the caveat that obviously we're coming out of the pandemic. These statistics probably have changed or shifted, and that we are gathering data or in the process of moving forward with a future study. So along those lines, it's also a good research tool, I'm sure. We continue to sell dozens of these studies every week. And I can't overstate the importance of the information that it includes.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so let's talk about what this study is not. It is not a census. We do not count every horse physically. We actually asked the USDA at one point if they would help us do a horse census across the country, and they came back with a price tag of $30 million to do that. We said, thank you, no thank you. We can't afford that. So it's really interesting when people call my office and they are questioning the number of horses that are included in the study. And they say, well, you didn't come to my house and count the horses in my backyard. So I want to make sure everybody understands it's not a census. We don't count every horse. What we do is we collect data from owners and from industry reports, and then we use statistical models that determine population and economic impact, and they use a number of very sophisticated models to do this. And when we did the last study, we went back and forth with a couple of different groups. We showed them the draft of their numbers, and they had some questions, and we do a little tweaking. But the bottom line is, this is all based on projections and forecasts. It's not like we've counted every little detail that's there. We do not categorize or classify horses. It uses the data that's collected to determine how many are in each sector. And quite honestly, I have a couple of people who want to argue about this. They say, oh, I'm convinced there's more horses in this sector than this sector, or doing this job than that job. And I say, the person filling out the survey is the one who made the determination to check which boxes they think these things fall into. So sorry, but we don't make that determination. Person filling out the survey does. We could not possibly collect data on every breed. The list of breeds is just too extensive. So if somebody calls me and they're upset because we've reported thoroughbreds, standard breds, quarter horses, and then maybe all other, and they're like, well, what happened to such and such a breed? And I'm like, they're in there. The list would have just been too long for us to list every possible breed and people to go through and check them all. It also becomes more complicated because people get to choose the breed. You know, if you think the horse you have in your backyard is a quarter horse, you check quarter horse. you know, we don't know if it is or it isn't, but that's up to the person filling out the survey. This data is only as good as what is supplied, which means if people don't get enough, if we don't get enough survey responses for a statistically valid sample, we can't project something. So, great example, 2017, we did the study. We had a couple of states that weren't getting enough responses. We had to go out, make a couple of more pleas to get more responses so we'd have a statistically valid sample. Meanwhile, I have somebody in a particular county in one state who says, I want the county data. And I said, we'll see, because we have to go back to the consultants and say, did you get enough responses from people in that county that you can come up with any specific county data? It's possible, but again, I'm saying all this because the integrity of the study is really dependent upon how much our partners, our allies in the industry help us push people to complete the survey. Last time we had about 35,000 people, I think, complete the survey, and we would have loved to have a much larger response than that. But I will admit, as one of these people who owns a horse, when you start through these questions on the survey and you get down and they want you to tell you how much you spent on feed, hay, farrier, et cetera, sometimes that can be a little bit intimidating because that's a lot of stuff to answer. But we really, really need people to understand the importance of all of that. Anybody questions so far? Here's what it is. Here's what it isn't. Nope. Nope. Okay. I'm going to keep going then. So let's talk about process. So first thing we do is we identify the scope of the project, the timeline, and the funding. So we send out a request for proposal. We get responses back from consultants that are experts at doing economic impact studies. We review all those, we interview them, we determine whether or not we think they are well suited to do this. But before we sign a contract, we have to begin fundraising and do a pledge drive. And our target is to raise 80% of the total cost before we sign on the dotted line. So if we do the study in 2022, we would need all of the pledges to cover 80% of the cost by 1st of October of 2021. Now, I'm going to be honest and tell you, I'm not seeing that happening right now. And so we'll talk some more about that, but I'm a little anxious about that. The next thing we do in the process is we start promoting this. So we announce we're going to do a study. We talk about what the study is. We start building collateral. In 2017, we had 13 or 14 states that did a breakout study. I listed those there for you. In 2022, we wanted to see if we could repeat all of those states, but we also wanted to target some states that didn't have a state horse council that we thought we needed to mobilize somebody because those states have large horse populations. And that's California, Florida, and Texas. Those are our 3 big states. And we don't even have a state horse council in those states. So we really wanted to see what we could do there. We'd also like to get studies from some of our top 10 states that didn't do it last time. Ohio, Missouri. So we've been looking at that. I asked Brian, and he can come back on in a minute if he wants. I asked Brian and Cliff, so when you go up on the hill and you're talking to people, which states do you get questions about that we did not have any results for? And the list they came up with was Arizona, South Carolina, and Tennessee. So Brian, you want to say anything else there about most popular requests you get?
Yes, come a big shock here. We need Texas. We need my home state. Big delegation, lots of horses there too.
Lots of horses there. Yep. Okay. So right now, I'm saying this. Nobody's signed any documents, so don't think that I've overly committed to you. But we've heard from North Carolina that they are interested. We've heard from Florida that they have some interest, and we've heard perhaps California might have some interest. So those are the only 3. We have received declines already from Colorado, Kentucky, Arizona, Maryland, Michigan, and Illinois. That's the reason that I'm really concerned about whether 2022 is the right year to do this. We went through the pandemic. State horse councils struggled because they couldn't put on their fundraisers and their expos. Their resources are depleted. They can't afford to do a state study right now. So I'm not certain that 2022 is the year. We'll see. One of the things that's most important for us is we have to tell the consultants how big the sample population is. So I've done a survey of equine associations and said, what we need to know is how many members you have in total and how many by state. We can add all those up and then we can say, okay, the total population we can reach in North Carolina is X. So to have a statistically valid sample, we would need this many responses. And we are still not getting responses to that survey as much as we would like. So just be aware of that. We have started development of some marketing campaign tools, and we have worked on some website stuff that we've already posted out there. So that's my story right now. We will not hire the consultant till we have enough funding to do it, but I have had questions about whether or not the survey will have the same questions as before. We think most likely it will have a lot of the same questions because we want to do some trending. We will ask the consultants if there were questions that people opted out of a lot because they just found them confusing or whatever, then we might have to rework a couple of those. We will likely add a little more demographic data this time around. We would really like to make sure that we've got a really good cross-section of responses. And if it were to happen, we would start circulating the survey sometime after the first of the year. It would probably run for several months, and then we would produce a final report in the fall of 2022. So I am going to stop sharing my screen right there. And I think there's a couple of questions in the chat and see what is out here. So someone said, how accurate is the USDA census for counting horses? I know census respondents must be on ag designated land. Great question, Tom. Hey, Cliff, if you're out there, unmute and let's talk about this a minute. So I think the answer, Tom, is somewhat consistent with our survey. Is the integrity of the responses really depend upon people who are supplying the data. But Cliff, chime in.
Yeah, I mentioned in the survey, they acknowledge less than 10% of the horse population in the United States. Reporting is lower than that, to Julie's point about respondents, but the USDA only officially acknowledges breeding animals and animals that are working on ranches in the livestock industry.
And I'm not mistaken, Cliff, I think when we did our study in 2017, we had 7.2 million horses. And I think the USDA census came up and said there are 2.3 or 2.5 billion horses in the US. And that's when we put out a press release saying, okay, hold on. You need to understand the differences in the definitions of what you're surveying here. The AVMA also does a survey. That's the American Veterinary Medical Association. Theirs is called PetSource. Some of you may be familiar with PetSource, where they ask pet owners to complete a survey, and they do include horses as one of the options. But the people that respond to that most likely have what they consider to be horses that are companion animals. So that number is even a little more confusing than everything else. So just heads up there. Other questions that anybody's got, unmute yourself and ask away. If you weren't aware, the national study in 2017 cost us $650,000 to do. We had 2 bids this time to do it. One of them was from the agency that did it last time. And because they did it last time and they have the methodology still valid and the process is still valid, they came in at a bid of right around $300,000. So I felt like, wow, that's a really good bargain. I was pretty happy with that. They also said if you were a state that did a study last time, you paid $65,000 last time. They're going to do repeat states for $25,000, and new states that didn't do a study last time, they're going to do for $35,000 because they have a few more things they have to do. Again, really good price. I don't know who else is out there from state horse councils, but there are some states that have tried to go off and independently do an economic impact study. And I've heard numbers in the hundreds of thousands for you to hire, I don't know, Deloitte and Touche or somebody to come in and do a state study on this thing. So questions, comments?
Julie, I just have a question. What is your timeline for making a decision or next steps?
That's a great question, Katie. So I'm talking to you guys today because I want some feedback. I want you guys to tell me what you're thinking. But I have a meeting with the Board of Trustees. There's Billy sitting out there. So I'll wave at him. I have a meeting with the Board of Trustees on the 28th of this month. I'm going to tell them all of this, and I am going to share whatever feedback you guys give me, and then I'm going to talk to them about what that timeline is. I'm really, really nervous. I'm being perfectly candid with you guys. I have 0 pledges for the national study right now, none. And so I'm a little anxious. Now, I got to give some kudos to a couple of people. So I talked to Jamie and I said, if we do the study, can you help me with coming up with some incentives to get people to participate in the study? So Purina has nicely said, we'll help you out, because I've got to get people to do the study. That's really important. But the first step is I've got to raise enough money to pay for the study.
So
Yeah, and I'll
Julie,
say, Julie, nothing changes with us if it moves out a year. You can just
So
plot
that
our,
may be what happens. It may move
Yeah.
out a year. Yeah.
and that was going to be my next question. Is there a possibility to move it out a year or two?
Yep, that's what I wanted to ask you guys. One of the people that called me, who would normally sponsor the study, that would normally help fund it, called and said, I've just got a little bit of a concern that with the pandemic, things have tailed off. And I'm afraid if you did a snapshot in 2022, it wouldn't be a very accurate snapshot because things haven't rebounded. I said, great point. So maybe 2022 is not the year to do this, not only because of the funding, but because of where the industry is, just period, kind of thing. Anybody else? Questions? Brian, you want to chime in and give your thoughts? Because you're the one on the hill up here trying to make it happen. Here he comes.
There we go. Yeah, like I said earlier, we're still making a lot of hay out of the 2017 study, but I'm not sure how much longer that shelf life will last. It would definitely be helpful to have something at some point following the pandemic. Can't underscore the difference. Probably the most important statistic we can share is how many people we employ in a specific state. So that message never gets old.
Yeah. Cliff, how about from your angle, when you're looking for support or resources from the agencies? Do you think that we can still rely on 2017 for another year or so, or are you hearing, an urgency to get updated data?
The agencies and state governments around the country utilized and reprinted our 2005 figures until the year of the 2017 release. So the need for speed on this is not really there in the agency side of things. That said, all of our industry outreach, clearly on the business side of things, these organizations and companies are looking for this information rapidly, and they need it to be accurate. And so I have definitely seen, as the 2017 figures have gotten older, I've seen more hesitancy in the corporate space in investing in new equine products and rollouts without actionable numbers. And that's been something that, I've been trying to ensure, new potential corporate partners that, will have actionable figures in the next year or so. But the reality is none of them are rolling up to the door with a $300,000 check. So, this is all, it's all fun and games until somebody actually has to pay the bill.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. Kathy, you had a question.
Not a question, I guess, more of an opinion, to Brian's point, saying that they want to use it to know how many people are employed. Those numbers are going to be really skewed.
That's what I'm worried about.
I think they're going to be very skewed, just as the economic impact, the overall economic impact numbers are going to be really skewed, depending on when this data is collected. So I guess that's what I would suggest, is not pick a year, not say, okay, we're going to do 2023, but instead pick a time frame that makes the most sense to collect the data. And that's, and I'm just making this up, and maybe that time frame to collect the data is September of 2022, a full year after, after supposedly most everything's, I don't know that, but do you see what I'm saying?
Yep. And I also, Sue Gray's on here from North Carolina, and they have said they're interested in the study. So I want to say to you guys that if we do postpone the study, I am more than happy to set up a dedicated, earmarked account that is for people who have the funds now and they want to go ahead and pay ahead and make sure that they've covered whatever it's going to cost to do the study, regardless of when we do the study. So you're not feeling like, oh God, I've got it in the budget for 2022, and if it doesn't happen, all bets may be off. You could go ahead and give us the money. We could put it in an earmarked account and just hold it until we're ready to pull the trigger. So just FYI about that. Anybody else? Comments, observations, questions?
Julie, I'll just say we've delayed some of our major research studies for the same reason. On our side, we're trying to figure out the right time for the types of studies we do every 5 to 7 years kind of thing. So.
Yeah. I'll say, Kate, because Katie's unmuted, I'll say to Katie, when I called the Kentucky Horse Council and they said, we're not going to do one, we're not going to pay for one, I was like, oh, wow. That really was a little bit eye-opening for me, because that's one of the prime states, of course, that everybody wants to know what the numbers look like. I was like, if they aren't comfortable doing one, that was really saying something.
So I think it goes back to, it's a catch-22 because of the COVID impact, and somebody made the comment in the chat about the COVID could really impact the numbers. And that's where we're at, is from a state animal health official, and we're looking at outbreaks and looking at foreign animal disease and the potential impact. We're trying to use the comparison to the, the human outbreak. So, what's the impact? Because that's a one common question we keep getting asked, is what is the impact of the COVID situation? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it might be great, but if that's the number that we're going to rely on for us going to legislatures in the future, that might not be what we want to rely on.
Right, exactly. It would be wonderful if we could inexpensively get a little snapshot, so internally we would know what the COVID impact is and not have to rely on those numbers. But I don't know that we can do that.
Yeah, and that's the point I was making, is can you delay it to get the more accurate number versus getting the impact of COVID and recovery?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's been a couple of groups that have made an attempt to get a COVID impact, and we may just have to rely on their data to tell us the COVID impact instead of using our dollars to try to do an economic impact study to get at that. Anybody else? Questions? Brian, did you have something you wanted to add?
Well, there is just one aspect of having, I guess, some diminished economic data coming out of COVID. We don't want it to be too severe, but you can always make the case that the horse industry could make a case that we would benefit from certain programs or tax policies or other regimes, if you will, because we are still recovering from the pandemic. We could make that argument.
Mm-hmm. Sort of like what you're doing with the outdoor venues right now, saying, hey.
Yeah, I don't think we've been wiped out into irrelevance. That's certainly not the case. We're too big in the first place. But if we can always make the case that we're the underdog and want to make a comeback, that's a message we can convey and make hay out of to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to pick on a couple of my trustees because they're on here. So I see Billy and Marilyn and Glenn. I think that's all the ones I see. So Billy, if I come to the board meeting on the 28th and I tell you this story and I give you this feedback, what questions would you have and what were your thoughts be at this point?
Julia, I would have some concerns about the economic answers that people would give based on where they are right now and how that could change pretty dramatically in the coming months. So I guess the direction I would lean a little bit is towards holding off.
Okay.
But I could be argued back the other way, but I would have some concern with some farms and some activities not fully staffed.
Yep, that makes sense to me. Makes sense to me. Glenn, are you there? Do you want to share anything? Any thoughts you've got?
Yeah, let's see. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fine.
Well, I agree with Billy. I think we need to get past all this stuff a little bit before we can get more meaningful data. Because things have been disrupted so much. And I just think the data will mean more if we wait, in my opinion.
Okay,
Hey,
good.
Julie, I think from our end, we would be in a better position to make some kind of contribution in that direction this year and then again next year,
Okay,
which
Right,
might
that's
give
okay.
you a window to raise a little bit more money.
okay. Marilyn, what are your thoughts?
I agree with that with waiting because of the data. Especially in the racing industry, we had tracks that were closed down for several months because of COVID, and I think the data is going to be skewed. But my question is, if we waited till 23 to do the study, is the data going to be from 22, and will everything be fully recovered by then?
I don't know. That's a question I have to ask the consultants is, what they see as the timeline for conducting the survey. It could be that they say, well, if we started in January of 23, you would be collecting data on 2022. They may say to us, let's wait till the second half of 23 so we can collect, data from early 2023. So I have to ask the consultants what their recommendation would be, Marilyn, and see what they say. Good point. Good point. Anybody
Julie,
else?
this is Sarah Coleman with the Kentucky Horse Council.
Yeah.
I just wanted to reiterate that we are not investing in it, not because we don't know that it needs to be done, but we're doing basically a census this year with the University of Kentucky in 2022. So it's not that we don't feel that the survey is important or impactful or anything like that, but just with the limited budget, we had already committed to this survey before we knew that you guys were doing one. So we definitely are interested next time around. We just can't afford to do both at once.
Makes sense, Sarah. I get that. Hey, Cliff, chime in a minute and remind me, when is USDA doing the next ag census?
I don't remember.
I think they do it every 5 years, so I think it's coming up.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if it's 2022 or 2023 though, and I just don't remember.
Okay, just thought I would ask if you knew. Okay. Anybody else questions, comments? We can certainly do I'll say a Qualtrics or a SurveyMonkey survey of some kind to try to get at some of the COVID impacts, a little more of an internal kind of thing, which we wouldn't hire a consultant to do other than maybe I'd ask Tom to help me with some of the questions, make sure we did a good job with that, because that's always a challenge. But we can do something like that easy enough, and you guys could help us spread it around to get at that, and then postpone doing a real economic impact study until later, whenever we think it's the right time to pull the trigger.
The next ag census will be in 2022. So
That's
if we waited, we could leverage our reporting against what they reported against.
okay. Thanks, I appreciate that. Let's see, I haven't heard from a couple of other people on here, so I'll pause here and say, anybody else out there that wants to weigh in or share a comment or an observation on this? Hey, Tom.
Yeah, Julie, one of the things I asked that question about the egg census, I think there's a lot of confusion amongst small farms, like we have 15 acres here and we board horses. How many horses do we represent? So I think the American Horse Council and our state horse councils could do a much better job of encouraging our members to fill out that census accurately and list the number of horses that they're caring for, as opposed to the number of horses that they own that are on their particular piece of land.
Okay, good to know. Cliff, you correct me if I'm wrong. I'm gonna pick on Tom a minute. If he has a piece of property and he's got X number of horses that are being boarded, he's not gonna get a USDA ag census request because he's not qualifying under their definition. Is that right?
Even if he does get the ag census request and does fill it out based on any other agricultural activity, you have 0 horses according to the USDA.
Yep.
And any information you send into them, they will disregard.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted Cliff to say that because when they met with us last time to talk, they told us basically we just pitch those responses. If they don't meet the definition, you can tell them that's what you have, but they're gonna just regard it. Anybody else? Questions, comments? Okay, well, that's what I had for this last session, and you guys have been really helpful in helping me inform me on which way you think we should go. So we'll definitely be talking some more as we have some conversations about timeline and when and where and how and all the other things that go into this. So thanks everybody for joining this afternoon. I really appreciate it. And thank you for your participation in the conference. I hope you enjoyed the conference. A lot of content, a lot of guest speakers, a lot of things went into this. So I'm going to say kudos to Brian and Cliff and Emily's on here and Ashley's somewhere out there, but they did yeoman's work helping us get this thing together. So thanks everybody, and thanks staff for all your hard work.
All right. Have a great weekend, y'all.
Have a great weekend. Happy Father's Day to all you dads.
Bye.
Thank you, Julie.
Bye.